It all started over a year ago, living in my current small neighborhood. It was unusually hot in our house for October, and my sister figured it would be a good idea to keep her window open for some air. She was doing homework and I was getting ready for bed when suddenly she bursts into my room. She frantically says that she heard some noises outside, sounds of leaves crunching under a person's steps. I believed it to be an animal, so I walk into her room and stay there for no more than 5 minutes, until I heard leaves crunching too. We quickly glance out the window only to hear the sound of someone running away into the woods. But that wouldn't be the end of the story. During the winter, I enjoy exploring the woods towards the back of my house, climbing trees and traveling further back to the fields. I remember the events very clearly. It had just snowed that night, first snowfall of winter, and I was more than excited to head out there. I did so and climbed my usual tree to get a good view of the property. I gave a cursory glance around me and at the ground when I noticed something strange. Footsteps leading away from my house. This wouldn't be weird as long as the beginning of the footsteps didn't end, pointing straight at my house. I tracked down the footsteps up to a point where there was a rusty wire fence covered in snow where they disappeared. October 2017, it started up again. I was laying in my bed pitch dark, not a light shining through my room when I heard it. My doorknob turning and my door creaking open. My heart stopped. Every single possibility of what was rushing through my mind. Keep in mind my door is always shut when I go to sleep. Since I was covered by my blanket, I quickly shot my sister a text. "Did you just come in my room?" She replied with a sharp, "No, I'm all the way in Hillard." My heart began pumping. Faster, faster. I slowly snuck my hand under my pillow and grabbed my police baton, sent a text to my dad and waited. My dad came in my room minutes later with a knife, shot on the lights, and I jumped out of bed. We searched the entire house and found nothing. Alarms set and all doors locked. Impossible. There's no way that happened otherwise. My dad and mom were asleep and my cat would have opened it much faster if it jumped at the doorknob. You best believe I didn't sleep a second that night. Fast forward to December. My relatives are in town staying for a week in the basement. We turn on the alarm and all head to sleep. I stayed up gaming. In the morning around 2:30 or 3, my uncle slowly opened his eyes with a feeling of being watched. His eyes adjusted a bit to the dark before he saw a guy, average height, scrawny, hair flowing in the wind and shivering, looking inside their room through the window. My uncle screamed and they grabbed the baby before taking off upstairs. That morning I was informed of what happened. I looked for footprints and saw only the smallest sign of a footprint. A front toe print made by what I could only assume was a sneaker. My uncle gave me more details. Without me telling him, I looked for footprints and he said the guy was leaning to the left looking in. The footprint matched his story. The left print had a thin line of dirt anyone could have shimmied across. Now that leads to tonight. The night I could swear he or whatever it was had been in our house. I couldn't sleep. Life has been stressful lately, and I was up all night until I tried getting rest. Every night I've had dimly lit Christmas lights hanging in the room, until tonight. I figured the lights must have been interfering with my sleep, so I unplugged them and headed off to sleep. I had my pillow over my head and I started to drift off until it happened. A quick strum of my guitar and the sound of something falling over, with the desperate attempt to stop it from hitting the ground, filled my room. The sound ignited my heart rate. I could feel the presence of someone in my room. Realizing I'd left my baton on my desk, I did the next logical thing. Pretended I was asleep. I tried and laid there for what felt like hours, when in reality it was only a few minutes until I heard a whimper come from my sister's room. Imagining this may be the day everyone in my family was silently murdered. But me, I gathered all the courage I had. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and grabbed my baton. I busted into my sister's room and screamed, "Hey!" only to see they were unharmed. My sister asked me what the hell I was doing, and I just stood there, looking into the pitch black of my room and cried. I've never in my life felt the overwhelming emotion of believing my family was going to be taken from me until today. I sit here in my chair writing this in hopes to document my experiences and try to come to some logical conclusion. All I can come up with is that there's some guy stalking my family and perhaps sneaking into our rooms at night. If anything else happens, post it to this thread. I'm going to sleep. Story number 2. It was the summer before my freshman year of high school. The year was 1998. My parents and younger brother were out of town, and I was basking in the freedom of being home alone for an entire day. I had spent most of that time shut up in my upstairs room watching TV while I chatted on the phone with my friends. Because three-way calling. Oh my God. After a few hours of MTV watching and phone chatting, I decided it was time to relax in a bubble bath and read a Stephen King novel, because that was my favorite pastime. My bedroom and the bathroom were side by side on the second story of a very large 3-story house. Our house sat on the edge of a small town. My dad was the local pastor of this town, so we would have random people show up at any hour of the day or night. Most of the time they were in need of food and or money, and sometimes they could be very persistent. I was instructed that when home alone I was not to answer the door. Just stay out of sight until the people left, then go on about my day. This strategy had worked for years, so why change it now? On this particular day, all had been quiet. The bathroom was upstairs and out of sight of any doors. It was the only interior door that was locked, so I always felt relatively safe in there. I shut off my TV and hung up the phone. I then proceeded to take a nice hot bubble bath. Once the tub was filled, I climbed in and started reading my book. I got a chapter in when all hell broke loose. I heard the sound of breaking glass coming from the kitchen below me, the room to the left at the foot of the stairs. Also the room with the back door, in which it consisted of a giant double pane of really old glass. My mother was always scolding us for shutting the door too hard. She was convinced we would break it. The sound of breaking glass is followed by a loud voice, a man's voice, a man that was not my father. I got out of the tub as quickly and quietly as possible, grabbed a towel, closed the bathroom door, and slid the lock over. I stood at the door listening for what felt like an eternity. Then again from the kitchen, a man's voice. This time quickly followed by a woman's voice that was not my mom. Jesus Christ, 2 intruders were in my kitchen, and there I stood butt naked, dripping wet, and with nothing but a bath towel to protect me. What was I supposed to do? I looked around the bathroom for weapons, and the best I could come up with was a plastic-handled toilet plunger. At this point, I realized that I hadn't heard anyone for a few minutes. I decided I was going to sneak to the top of the stairs and listen. Maybe they left after realizing we didn't have any items with any street value. Armed with the toilet plunger, I unlocked the bathroom door and tiptoed to the top of the stairs. Within seconds, I heard them talking in the kitchen. I decided I needed an evacuation plan and better weapons. I tiptoed back into the bathroom and relocked the door. I knew I didn't have much time until they would come to explore or rob the upstairs. I knew that when I got to the bathroom of the stairs, I would be in full view of the kitchen, and the stairs creaked so they would definitely hear me coming. I also knew that the base of the stairs led to the front door if I made a quick right, so I could get down and out the door before they realized what was going on. But if they heard me coming, I might have to fight for my life. I needed to find a good weapon because it was going to be a 2-on-1 fight. I snuck back out of the bathroom and into my bedroom. The whole time I heard them in the kitchen. The best thing I could come up with in my bedroom was a lighter and a bottle of hairspray. I'll melt these fuckers' faces off. I went back to the top of the stairs and listened again. They were still down there. I counted to 3 and made a run for it, lighter and hairspray at the ready. I reached the landing and turned to glance at the kitchen. That's when everything became glaringly obvious. Sitting in the middle of the kitchen table was my father's pager for the squad. The male EMT was telling the female dispatcher that they had just arrived at the hospital. I let out a huge sigh of relief and started laughing hysterically at my own stupidity. The door wasn't broken and I was still home alone. Story number 3. My boyfriend and I, as well as our good friend, were living in an apartment in our city. To initially get into the large complex, there are security gates that need an access key, then another security door to get to the stairwell of ours, and our neighbors' apartments, then the unit doors themselves. There had been a few occasions where I'd come home and realized the door to the stairwell was just sitting on the frame without actually closing. I always tried to make an effort to close it properly as I came and went. On this night, my boyfriend, flatmate, and another friend were having drinks at our place on a weeknight, and it was about 11 when our friend who lives up the road took off for the evening. We went to bed like normal. It must have been 2 in the morning and I woke up suddenly because I thought I could hear someone treading on the carpet. Shortly thereafter, I was confronted by the silhouette of a guy standing in our bedroom. I couldn't make him out because my eyes were adjusting to the light, but I immediately thought it was our flatmate. We must have his car keys. It's funny how the brain tries to make sense of a strange situation. To me, the silhouette looked remarkably like our flatmate, who was quite a small guy of similar height and build. I stared at him and he slowly backed out of the room. Then I saw him peer around the door again. I couldn't make out his face and I said, "Yeah, Josh, what do you want?" It was the lack of response that scared me the most. My flatmate would have just explained what he was doing. He left the doorway and my heart started pounding. So I elbowed my partner who woke up and said, "I think there's someone in the house." I'm surprised at how quickly he got up, still half asleep. I watched him leave the room for the lounge, and then really loudly he said, "What the fuck? Who the fuck are you? Get the fuck out of my house." Turns out this guy was hiding around the wall waiting. I don't think he was expecting to be confronted by my large partner. This guy then bolted for the door, which he left on its hinges while saying, "Sorry." I started screaming. It was insane how close the stranger had been and how vulnerable we both were. My boyfriend said it was an Asian man. Turns out he had gone into our flatmate's room first because the door she usually keeps closed was open. He sleeps with his headphones on and hadn't noticed a thing. Looking back, I think we should have called the police right away, but we left it until the next morning. There was nothing missing. I think he was just an opportunist. We were told that security found that he had checked all the doors along the stairwell until he got to ours, which was stupidly left unlocked. Normally, my boyfriend is really good about locking the doors. We ended up with a deadbolt as well as a chain lock, and we never take home security lightly anymore. We have since moved on. I have no idea what he was after. He got in through the faulty door to the stairwell, must have jumped our gate. Story number 1. This happened a few years ago when I was 7 or 8. My family went to the movies very late in the day. We were watching Star Wars or Jurassic World. Anyway, we went home with our leftover candy and soda, talking about our favorite characters and scenes. It was dark outside when we got home. We got inside and our big giant schnauzer dog was all riled up. This was really strange because she's usually a big teddy bear and doesn't get mean. We walk into the kitchen and the window looks like it was forced open. Cups on the counter were knocked over. What we think happened was someone broke into our house and the giant guard dog scared him away. At the time, I didn't realize how scary that was. I was just trying to calm down my dog. I thought about it a couple days ago and I get chills thinking about what could have happened. My parents changed the locks on the windows, and we rewarded our dog for her valiant duties. Story number 2. Around 2012, I lived with my parents for a year in my early 20s. In the summer, they would go away to their summer home on the weekends. And not being a fan of leaving the city that frequently, on those weekends I would often have the house to myself. Having lived in apartments for a few years, and being someone who reads true crime, moving back to a multi-story house freaked me out. If someone broke into the basement window, for example, and I was in my bedroom, I knew I would never hear them come in. If someone broke in while I was out and waited for me, there were plenty of places for them to hide. So something I'd do out of habit when I'd come home to that empty house was to yell, while still in the front door, "Get out of my fucking house. I'm calling the police." I still do that sometimes if I'm visiting and find myself home alone. I figure that if someone's in the house, I'll at minimum hear them moving around when I shout. If there was no one in the house, then there would be no one to hear my crazy yelling. Honestly, I really knew that the odds of someone being in the house were extremely low, and the main purpose of yelling was for my own peace of mind, so that I could sleep that night feeling confident that no one else was in the house. Another thing I do when home alone, day or night, I'd compulsively check the lock on the interior of the front door. I knew what it looked like, locked or unlocked, because I grew up in that house. Anytime I was passing from my bedroom on the second floor to the kitchen or living room on the first, I'd pass by that front door, and I'd give it a glance to check its position out of habit, and it was always locked. One of these weekend nights when my parents were out of town, I was lying in bed on my computer on the second floor when I heard a sound on the first floor. It sounded like someone was moving around. I distinctly remember thinking it sounded like it was coming from the front hall. I decided to do my own little routine yelling, "Get the fuck out of my house," like I said earlier. I called the police. I didn't hear anything else. I didn't often get freaked out by sounds coming from inside the house, but it had happened before, so I chalked it up to my own paranoia. I forgot about it completely. An hour or so later, I went downstairs, probably to get a snack or something in the kitchen. Like I always did when home alone, every single time I walked by that front door, I glanced at the lock on the door. This time I froze. It was unlocked. I know I had checked that door at least a few times earlier in the night while puttering around the house. I know it had been locked. The thing that makes it extra hard for me to dismiss the lock as simply an oversight on my part, something I somehow missed multiple times, is the sound that I heard coming from that exact part of the house, the sound that stopped when I yelled. I put the chain lock on and slept with my chair under my doorknob that night. Now, the thing that's extra weird to me is I figure whoever went into my house that night had to have a key to just let themselves into the front door. I know my mom gives out keys to a lot of people, friends, people who worked in the house. Honestly, anyone who needed to would get a key, and I highly doubt my mom would ask for it back. She's not very careful about these things. Also, many of the people who have my parents' keys would have also known that my parents would be away that weekend. Or it's possible they knew I'd be home alone, and I took them off guard with my yelling. I've got no idea. I have no idea why the hell they were in my house that night, because they knew they weren't expected or invited, whoever it was. Anyway, I know this isn't a super exciting story, but it happened and I felt like writing it somewhere. Story number 3. In 2007, I was 17 at the time this happened. I was home alone the night with my mother. It was a boring evening and I was watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I have a habit of looking out the window just to see what's going on and look what's going on outside. However, that night when I looked out the window, I noticed this man was standing across the street, Looking at him, I was confused to why he was just standing there staring at my house. He was dressed in all black and not moving, just staring. I yelled out to my mother, "Hey, there's someone outside looking at the house." She went and looked towards the window and was just as confused as I was. My mom closed the blinds and shut the lights off so the man from outside would not be able to see in. We checked and peeked through the blinds, and he was still there but had moved closer. She picked up the phone and called the cops. We explained what was going on. They said they would come check it out, and if he was still there, they were going to send someone in to keep the lights off and the doors locked. We looked out the window again slowly. We noticed the man in black was gone. We let out a sigh of relief. We called the police back and they said for the next days to keep a lookout in case he was to come back, and that they would send a police car to check the area out. That was one of my creepiest experiences I've ever had. Story number 4. One night around 8 years ago, my friends and I watched Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, and we're talking about how it would be cool to enroll in a martial arts or self-defense class. Little did we know that we might need it if things went a violent turn that same night. One of my said friends was my roommate. Our room, which was literally just a bedroom with 2 bunk beds, was at the rooftop 5th floor of a dorm building. There were only 2 rooms on this floor, including ours, and the other half is an open area with a table, chairs, and a washing area. Our 2 other roommates were not yet there when we got home, and even when we were getting ready to sleep, so we figured they might be staying overnight somewhere else. I'm not sure how much time has passed, but I woke up to the sound of our door slowly opening. My bed was on the top bunk on the opposite side, while my roommate's bed was on the top bunk adjacent to the door. I figured it was just one of our roommates. I didn't want to engage in small talk, so I just closed my eyes again. However, I remember opening my eyes ever so slightly because I was confused when I didn't hear any sound that would indicate our roommate entering the room. I saw that our roommate was still standing outside our door, which was left ajar. From my position, I couldn't see the upper half of her body because the other bunk was blocking the view. A person walked to the open area outside our room, right next to the table just beside our windows. I still wasn't alarmed at this point because we would sometimes hang out there before going into our rooms. I closed my eyes and tried to go back to sleep. My alarm bells finally went off when I could feel the light, which I guessed was from a phone's flashlight, shining on my face. My instinct told me to keep my eyes closed, so I just shut my eyes and somehow I fell asleep again. I thought that it was just a bizarre dream, so you could imagine my horror and confusion when I saw the door was left wide open. When I woke up and the other 2 roommates didn't seem to be back during the night. My roommate was a deep sleeper and slept throughout the night. I recounted the strange events of the evening. We checked if there was anything missing with our things. We both had our phones under our pillows, but her wallet was missing. Later that day, we found the wallet laid down on the hallway of the 4th floor. Her cash was gone, and her wallet photos were taken from the pocket and placed beside the wallet. This is one of the creepiest things that has happened to me. I don't want to imagine what the person was planning to do if I decided to open my eyes that night. Story number 5. I live in a pretty good community where things are relatively peaceful. Breaking and entering is a blue moon around here. However, it still finds a way to happen, and it scared the living hell out of me. This happened late at night, around 1 or 2 a.m., and everyone in my house was zonked out, including myself. The whole residence is dead silent, till the crack of shattering glass rings through the house, instantly waking me up. Now I'm no fighter. I'm a scrawny 16-year-old, and I know damn well whoever got through that window could easily overpower me. But even so, I still grasp the knife under my pillow. As I'm doing this and trying to stay calm and remember where I put my phone, I hear 2 sets of really heavy footprints land out in the living room and started walking around. My heart skips a beat knowing there's not one, but 2 people that have just broken into my house, and I realize I left my phone on the desk in my room. Now don't get me wrong, I love this house with all of my heart, but the floors creak if you so much as drop a toothpick on it, so the cops are out of the question. I hear my door creak open and I hear a deep, gruff voice that I've never heard in my life say, "If anyone wakes up, take them out by any means." My heart stops. I do absolutely everything I can to keep my breathing under control, and I hold my knife as if it's the only thing I've ever cared about. I hear my TV being hoisted out of my room, and I was hoping this meant they would leave. After taking most of the electronics in the home, they left and I called the cops. I just cried for the rest of the night knowing how utterly close I was to death. Story number 6. A bit of background info. I currently live with my parents, and our home is 2 stories. There is an in-law apartment on the first floor, along with some other things: garage bay, furnace room, laundry room. I live in the in-law apartment. My dad has been working with a contractor, some of his employees, to replace the wall-mounted air conditioners. There have been a lot of people in and out of the house. The day this happened, my mom and I went out to do some grocery shopping. My dad stayed home to direct the contractors. We got back and discovered they were gone. My dad had gone to bed, so my mom and I made some dinner and hung out upstairs for a little while. I mentioned offhandedly to my mom that our cars were still outside, and I talked about a woman whose car and house had been broken into down the road. This creeped her out and she sent me downstairs to check that the front door was locked. It wasn't. In fact, it was just a little bit ajar. I closed it and locked the deadbolt, then went back upstairs. We stayed upstairs and watched TV for a few more minutes, till I heard a loud thump downstairs in the in-law apartment. I assumed that this was my cat, getting antsy because I wasn't feeding her. I told my mom that I was going to go downstairs to feed her, and then come up to finish the show. As I walked down the stairs, I heard another louder thump, which I thought was my cat getting excited it was food time. I opened the door and she was nowhere to be found. Really unusual for her, so I was confused. I walked into the kitchen to look for her and noticed something that made my heart sink. The furnace door was closed. I never close the furnace door, neither do my parents, because we want the cat to be able to get inside to catch mice. I recognized then that the thump that I had heard could have been the heavy furnace door closing. I was completely frozen, convinced that there was someone right behind that door hiding from me. Now, I'd seen a lot of scary movies lately. It could have been my paranoia, but this felt awful and just not right. I knew that I didn't want to give this potential person any reason to open the door. I put on my best acting skills, pretended that I didn't notice anything amiss. I did some baby talk to my cat and scooped out some food for her. I was super creeped out whenever I had to let the door out of my sight. I was basically keeping it in my vision at all times to see movement. After feeding the cat, I went back upstairs. I grabbed my mom and explained what had happened. She was skeptical again because of the scary movies. She thought maybe one of the contractors had closed the door. Seeing how off-put I was, she went to go wake up my dad. my dad grabbed his gun and went downstairs. He screamed at us to call the cops and get somewhere safe. We hid in the bedroom and we called the cops, who showed up and searched the entire house, not finding a soul. My dad explained to me after they'd gone through the house why he said to call the cops. He saw that the furnace door and the back door to the outside were both open. I was at home alone in my previous apartment, in a not-so-great neighborhood. My apartment was on the ground level and my bedroom window faced a back alley. A dumpster sat less than 2 car lengths away, where homeless people often rummaged. Just before dawn one morning, I heard a tapping at my window. My back was to the window and my eyes were now wide open. It was still dark outside. I sleep with my lamp on and my worn-out vertical blinds were missing a slat, causing a 6-inch gap. So I knew that whoever or whatever the source of the tapping could see me lying in bed plain as day. The tapping was brief, maybe 5 or 6 taps. So I spent the next 5 seconds or so frozen, bizarrely trying to convince myself it was something or anything else other than a person watching me and tapping on my window. Maybe it was an animal, but then came more tapping. Now I was faced with the terrifying reality that someone had been watching me through my window in the dark for God knows how long, and now decided to tap on my window. Had one of the homeless people become aggressive during their dumpster dive? Something told me that nothing good would come from turning around and looking out that window. If he got me to look at him, what then? Remember, my back was to the man, so I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes and pretending I was too groggy to hear him. I stood up and hazily made my way out of my bedroom, as though I was going to the restroom or something. Once I was out of his sight, I ran to the phone to dial 911, considering whether to forget any embarrassment of being in my t-shirt and underwear, and bolt out of my front door, which was out of sight from the intruder. I wasn't sure I could outrun whoever it was, or whether anyone would help me if I couldn't. Before I could make a decision, I heard a loud pop of my window being pried open. I thought my heart would jump from my chest. At the same time, I could hear my upstairs neighbor Mike descending down the stairs. I opened my door a few inches and peeked out to ask him for his help. Mike was a large man, and I'd heard he was trained in martial arts of some sort. He didn't hesitate to respond, hustling to the back of my apartment to see what was going on. Within a few seconds, I heard rumbling and someone being thrown against the wall into the bushes. A few moments later, Mike came around to my front door, telling me not to worry about seeing that man again. He'd beaten him up pretty badly. I wanted to believe Mike that the would-be intruder was maybe dumpster diving, but that he would hopefully never venture this way again. But it wasn't a homeless person. According to Mike, when the guy escaped, he ran to the front of my building, hopped into a red sports car, and sped off. My neighborhood wasn't a red sports car kind of place. The police later told me that the intruder was likely someone who'd seen me out somewhere and followed me home to find out where I lived. To Mr. Window Tapper,